The agent sank into the freezing water once more, running his eyes down a huge, deep pool. He now had to swim at least 150 meters to the other end of the pool without surfacing once. He propelled his body forward, arms and legs bound, but moving relatively faster than any other session he had done before. He wasn't often short of air anymore, but he never really completely count on it. He never knew how things would be with Hunk. He reached the other end of the pool, lifted his head up above the water, and took a deep breath before diving in once more and starting to swim towards the bottom of the pool. Opening his mouth, the ancient held the light weight on his teeth and deftly turned his body and propelled himself back upwards towards the surface. As soon as the weight made contact with the air, the small compartment opened. A small finger-sized blade came out of the weight and fell into the water. The ancient sank back down after taking in another deep breath. In the water, his body turned his body and took a small blade in his hand, cutting the ropes that bound around his wrists from tied to his legs. Without rising to the surface, he swims another point in the pool and opens a suitcase at the bottom. From inside, he takes out a tactical rifle with a silencer and laser sight. Placing his feet on the bottom of the pool, he propels himself forward and swims at great speed to another spot. This one is marked with a red ribbon, just at the edge of the pool at least 100 meters from where he was standing. The air was getting short, and he hurried his movements. A moment later, he rose to the surface to deftly climb out of the pool, kneeling on one leg and pointing the rifle at the target in front of him, where he fired, hitting his target dead on. The clock on his wrist stopped ticking, and he clicked his tongue in frustration, and he had been not fast enough. The agent shook his head and stood up, catching a glimpse of Hunk, approaching a leisure pace. 3 minutes and 7 seconds, Hunk began, his voice slightly muffled due to his mask. It's still not perfect, but I have to admit, you are improving fast, he said, crossing his arms. The ancient wipes the excess water off his face and takes in a deep breath, feeling his body shaking from the cold water. At least he wasn't in danger of freezing to death, unlike his endurance and training. Get back in position and let's try again. Focus, agent, Hunk said, turning and walking away from the agent, who also turns and walks towards a point that marked a position in which he was to remain. His arms were already in the aching, and those clothes were irritating his skin. He didn't know how many times he would have repeated this training session, but he knew it had to be in at least 3 hours since it began. And it didn't look like it would end anytime soon. The guards accompanying the training all left the equipment in respective places, and quickly left the water when they were finished. Taking in a few deep breaths when the guard had finished, tying both of his hands and his feet, the agent waited patiently for the starting signal. His blue eyes, now slightly red, looked towards Hunk, who gave a signal. Without thinking much of anything but the goal, the agent jumps headfirst into the water and begins to do all the training all over again. Literally a few minutes after his underwater training, the agent was already running on the sand of the beach with all of his military equipment. Running was one of the things he had did most of those 2 months. He was running as fast as he could, and the clock was against him. His eyes were heavy and his vision was slightly blurred, but he could barely feel his legs, but he still kept going. His heart was still beating strongly, his fatigue was present, but he never to the point of making him collapse by the end of the training. Gritting his teeth, he had gasped. The agent jumped up and began to climb a rope at the top of the tower made of wood, and the obstacle course had arrived. From the top of the tower, he takes a zip line that leads him up, and a muddy takes-it lake just above his waist. Hunk followed him for a distance, attentive, and as always with his arms crossed, always reminding him of the hand of the clock, always reminding him not to stop. That's when he always said, "Don't stop. If it doesn't suck, we don't do it." Once he was out of the mud pond, he would begin to jump and now go from obstacles of monkey bars, dodging the rubber shots with the guards were shooting in his direction, or at least trying to. Stepping off the monkey bars, he takes his rifle in hand and starts running through the obstacles, jumping and letting himself slide along the ground, while at the same time shooting at targets that randomly appeared in front of him. Next to the targets, civilians. His decision had to be quick, precise, and a single mistake would result in his death or a death of some civilian. Whatever by the hands of terrorists that were targeting, or by his own after mistaking a frightened civilian for an enemy. He had no idea how many times he had already failed that obstacle, and frankly he didn't care. As always he did, he was focused on something. He only cared about the accomplishment, and the end was all that mattered. Letting himself slide under yet another obstacle, he quickly stood up, threw his body forward, and rolled over a small metal box. Before he could even touch the ground, he raised his military rifle and fired at 2 targets ahead, continuing to run up the inclined wall and past the first obstacle. The next was a spider on the wall, one of the most difficult for him, but in which time almost became unnatural. Still, he was still not good enough. At the end of the course, he had knelt on one leg, panting, and watched Hunk as he approached. 17 seconds faster than last week, but 36 seconds too slow, Hunk said, and Leon lowered his head, locking his jaw. Still too slow. The loud noise did not bother the agent. The strong wind that shook his hair violently was ignored with all of his concentration. His blue eyes stared at the small red dot miles away. He looked to the sides and checks the pilot of the plane. Then he moves his eyes to Hunk, who was finishing checking on something with the pilot. Hunk moved closer and leaned in beside Leon without taking his eyes off the agent. "On my arrangements," he shouted. A Glock 19 9mm there with the Inglong mag, 45 rounds, primary weapon, and an M4A1 with a monolithic suppressor on the optical sight, 60 round clip, 120 bullets, 2 remote explosives, and flash grenades, the agent shouted back. "Objective," Hunk ordered. "Get in and out. Infiltrate into the enemy territory. Rescue the samples in Compound B, and then get out to the extraction point," Hunk confirmed, nodding his head. 45 minutes? In and out, go!" he shouted, and then the agent immediately jumped out of the plane. The wind was whipping hard on his face, and the small point marked on the ground was not approaching fast enough. His heart was pounding, and his mind echoed was the only ticking of the clock. Still in the air, he looked at his watch. Every second was valuable, and the moment he found himself glued to the movement of the clock hands. The noise around him was muffled, and it was as if he entered a space of his own. The hand made a one complete turn, and it was that then the agent pulled the cord of his parachute, returning to reality with a snap of the finger. 22 seconds to landing. 1 second later he had anticipated. He landed on the bright red spot marked on the ground and dropped his parachute, starting to run towards his goal immediately. The forest was bumpy and the ravine was fragile, but his training allowed him to get through the place with great skill and speed. His mind was working faster than visualizing the terrain and choosing the best choices. The goal was at least 4 kilometers, 2.4 miles away from where he landed. His equipment was heavy, but nothing that months of training couldn't get him used to. Minutes passed and he soon saw his goal, an entrance to an underground cavern. Training dummies scattered around with laser-sighted weapons next to the cameras. If he was detected, the device attached to his chest would beep and glow red, resulting in a failed mission. He needed to be silent, fast, and deadly. 4 minutes and 37 seconds earlier than anticipated. Good. The agent slid down the hill and hid behind a small pile of boxes that were lying around, something that he should give signal to contraband. The agent leaned up to his body and observed the situation. There were 2 targets ahead, targets that served as enemies. There was a sniper over in the cave right behind him. Smoke. The agent was still down, decided to go around the place and flank the sniper, approach it from behind the target, disabling the attached camera, signaling that he had taken out the enemy. Turning around, he observed where the smoke was coming from, and there was a small opening that led to the cave. He could hear the one from above rather than the front, which would certainly draw more attention. The ancient leaned forward and narrowed his eyes slightly because of the smoke, and as soon as he could see that it was possible to go down, he took a small grappling hook from his military utility belt, stuck it in the ground as firmly as he could, and threw himself in through the hole. He descended slowly, scanning the place without the smoke. Raising his rifle, he shoots the first two agents that he had seen. The bullets were rubber and only knocked out the targets, but it was still enough for William and the others watching know that was more targets to be eliminated. The agent put both feet on the ground and retracted the grappling hook, putting it back on his belt. Ahead was the entrance to the cave. To the right was a single path that led to try to follow. Eliminating one more target, he had turned to the left and ran his eyes over the open area to the inside of the cave. There was a large iron gate just up ahead. Just above it was a control tower. From a distance, he could see the lever that was probably used to open the gate with two targets next to it. Below some targets, he would have to be careful, because if he were eliminated one target within the sight of others, the lasers would activate and he would risk a great risk of being spotted. First, he raised his rifle and eliminated the two targets at the observation tower. He picked up the flash grenade and threw it in the middle of the targets. As soon as the grenade went off, he knew that the cameras would be a bit jammed for a few moments. He quickly came out of hiding, shooting at the remaining targets, knocking them down at great speed. Once all the targets on the ground in sight were dead, he again grabbed the grappling hook from his belt and threw it at the observation window tower. After realizing that he had been studying enough, the agent began to climb the rope until he reached the window bars. From his back pouch, he takes a small tool, something like a small blowtorch, and cuts through some of the bars, knocking them to the ground below them. After, he takes a small diamond knife, which made the intention of cutting glass without making any kind of noise. It was handy, even though it was expensive to produce. The agent entered the tower quickly and made his way to the door, which was slowly opened, ran his eyes through the stairs that led to the white corridor. He had descended the steps slowly. As he reached the base of the stairs, he scanned the corridor up ahead. There was a door on both the right and left of the corridor that led to the research rooms or something of that sort. He didn't care. What mattered, however, were the targets present inside of each room. He moved to the right, leaning his body to the side. He shot all the targets he saw at great speed, giving no time for the lasers to find him, much less alarm to sound. After making sure he had no other targets in the room or nearby, he continued down the hall. There was no real reason to eliminate the targets in the room. After passing through the one more door, he passes through a long corridor that was divided into 3 parts. The right was where the room should be, the front of it was the way he should go, and the left of it was places like the cafeteria and the others. He followed forward, passing through the door, and following the corridor, eliminated all the targets he thought necessary to continue without being seen. However, at a certain moment after entering the room, he saw another target rising from behind the desk and take a few steps beside him. In reflex, he had fired. The device on his chest beeped, and soon the agent grumbled loudly when he saw that he had shot a civilian. His radio signaled life, and he quickly shook it in his hand. "Sir," he was the first to say, shaking his head as he first looked at the fallen target. "Report, Agent," Hunk ordered, and the agent clicked his tongue. "I shot a civilian, sir," the agent explained, placing the rifle on the table and running a hand through his hair, trying not to look at his reflection in the glass ahead. God, he had deep circles under his eyes. "I saw it on camera, Agent. What you do wrong?" Hunk asked. I acted before I thought. I couldn't find the balance between the two at the time. I couldn't hold my trigger finger," the agent replied. For a few moments, Hunk remained silent. "Okay, Agent. If it were up to me, you wouldn't have failed the mission," Hunk said, after a while causing the agent to stare at a few moments at the radio in his hand. The death of the civilian was an accident, but that kind happens all the time in lines of work. Whether it's a simple police job, a SWAT mission, or fighting Umbrella, like it or not, you're going to have to deal with it, Hunk said, and the agent sided this information. He knew that. However, this mission needs to be perfect. William wants much focus on this final line since I'll be returning to the battlefield, and soon will no longer be able to assist in your training. So go back and think about what you can do better, and try again. We will not return to the base until you have completed. Got it? Hunk asked, and the agent picked up his rifle again. Yes, sir, he replied, walking back towards the hallway. Do you need to change arrangements? No, sir, just resupply. Walter carefully carried the small vial containing the orange liquid inside the quarters of the facility. He had finally managed to produce samples that could finally be used, provided that they were carefully and in small quantities, just as William had requested. Walter sighed slightly before entering William's office. As soon as he entered, he altered his gaze between William and Hunk, who was sitting on the chair on the opposite desk that Wesker was using. Ah, Doctor, Walter, just in time, William said, his arms behind his back as always, usual wearing his sunglasses. That was somewhat intriguing. Walter had ever seen William's eyes, but from what he had told him, his eyes were not similar to the human eyes. I came as fast as I could, sir, Walter said, approaching and looking at Hunk shortly after. Hunk, he greeted, receiving a nod from the agent. Dr. Walter, Hunk greeted back. So let's settle things, William said, turning to Hunk. I may have not followed your training due to some problems with a virus that hit a small rural area of Central America. But I read your report, William began, and Walter sat down in a chair a few steps from beside Hunk. I admit that Agent 06 succeeded in my expectations. No matter if he had potential, he wouldn't have progressed this far if you hadn't taught him well. William leaned on the table, but as skilled as he is, he needs more experience. What if he went through it again in Raccoon City, proved that what it takes to take on small creatures? The mission that would be assigned to you. I was thinking of sending him along. Do you think he's ready? William asked, as Hunk remained quiet for a moment, his head lowered, seeming to think. Sir, I have witnessed his evolution personally, and I would like to say he would be accomplished of the mission of this level on his own. Yes, for small missions, he is ready. William nodded, apparently satisfied with his answer. Good, Walter. The doctor placed a small vial on the table, attracting William's attention. I was able to come up with a pleasing result. Unfortunately, most of the animals that were tested up with it ended up dying, but there were a few subjects that managed to survive, Walter said, placing a folder on the table and opening it. The first thing what appeared was some pictures of the dead animals. All of them had suffered with some kind of mutation, but it was not what William was interested in. Walter picked up some of the photos of the surviving subjects, 3 rabbits and a single mouse. William looked at the photos and all had mutated in some way, but not as grotesquely or intensely as the previous subjects. All the survivors had a mass growth more than 15%. The rabbits jumped faster and were stronger, as well as having almost unsustainable hunger. Their instincts improved exponentially, but the interesting thing was unlike other subjects, they did not behave violently. Despite the changes, they remained behaving just like rabbits, Walter explained, taking a tablet from his small bag and placing it on the table, showing a video of one of his assistants feeding the rabbits normally. You were having trouble with it a while back. What did you do to accomplish this? William asked, watching the video. I injected a small amounts of modified blood from Agent 006 each week into the subject, and then applied the stimulant, Walter explained. What about the rat? Hunk asked, to the doctor's surprise. The rats, like rabbits, act normally. However, in this case, his speed has increased exponentially, and he can get through the cage no matter of a second or two. Walter of that switching the video on the tablet. The rat had also grown, and the video clearly shows the moment of one of Walter's assistants throw food into one of the corner of the cage with the rat in the opposite corner, and at the which point the rat had crossed the cage so fast that they almost couldn't see. That's amazing and worryingly, Hunk said, crossing his arms. It was not a secret to anyone near that he was totally against those experiments, saying that it was too dangerous and those viruses were not those things should be treated as a joke. Well, maybe it would be, but I assume these subjects would have almost a few more days to live. The virus is attacking and devouring the foreign cells. All things considered, it doesn't work in ordinary humans, but there is a 77.7 chance that it will work in Agent 06. The effects should last between 7 and 10 days, and it shouldn't take as long to show itself, Walter said, hiding the fact that he still drastically decreased the amount of G used in the dosage. If any side effects on Agent 06 body, it will be time less worrisome. That's good enough, Hunk. You can go to your Central America tomorrow and get things ready. Leon will accompany you in 9 days, William said after a nod. Hunk stood up. The one day before the mission. Right, sir, doctor. He nodded lightly to Walter. Before walking out of the office, Walter applied the dosage to Agent 06 later today, and at the end of his training, I want a frequent dosage every 10 to 12 days, William said. Already expecting something like that, Walter nods. Yes, sir. Walter stood up and nodded, muttering an excuse me before he left. Agent 6 dragged himself through the corridors of the facility. His body ached and he was already tired. He couldn't wait to fall into his bed and sleep. The things about his training that uses of herbs was extremely limited. In the first month, he took the herbal mixture every 7 days. In the second, he only had every 14 days, and so he went on. To his misfortune, at that moment, he could only take those herbal mixture in 2 months. According to Hunk, he could not get used to anything like that. He would let his body heal himself. And while it wasn't exactly a problem, due to the use of herbs in the training, and the examinations to his natural regeneration has increased. A sigh escaped his lips. He would have had to wake up early tomorrow so his training would go through another change again. According to Hunk, it would get even harder, as he would earn ranged skills and control the new weapons and vehicles. Well, at least he will get a full night's sleep. 4 months ago, he had slept no more than 4 hours a day, 24 hours pure physical training. He had seriously wondered how he would survive. But like it or not, it changed him. He starved, suffered from dehydration, and bled every minute. Dealt with extreme temperatures, where he had thought he would either freeze to death or die of heat stroke, from temperatures of minus 15 degrees, almost 50 degrees. It was not only physical training and endurance training. No, it was also a mental training. He also saw how necessary this was. After a few minutes of walking, he had reached B-32 medical ward and saw Walter with his head down, massaging his temples. He had not noticed them there yet, so the agent knocked 3 times, and the door opened before entering, causing Walter to raise his head in surprise. Ah, Agent! Christ, I didn't even see the time passed. Come on in, Walter said, getting up from his chair and stretching. He looked tired. Is everything all right, Doc? The agent asked in a neutral tone, but that contained with a bit of deep concern inside. He wouldn't say he was Walter's friend. Friend was too strong of a word, but he certainly had a certain friendly relationship. Yeah, I'm tired. I haven't slept in over a week, Walter said. But, well, I guess I shouldn't complain. Do you even sleep? He asked, a small smile, and the agent sat down on the chair and he tilted. Sometimes, the agent replied. You called me 4 days earlier than usual, he said, and Walter shook his head, placing some things on the tray right beside the agent. The agent looked at it with a certain suspicion, trying to understand what exactly it was. Some cotton wool, a bottle of reddish-orange liquid, and some syringes. It was rather obvious that Walter would have injected him with this stuff. Now, what exactly was it? William has asked me to administer the type of stimulant with your blood, with your modified G virus as the main ingredient, Walter explained, pulling the liquid down from inside of the vial into a syringe. As you know, Agent, the G virus works together with your adrenaline, that being the reason you can perform actions that would shut you down a normal person's body. The intentional idea was to amplify those effects into your attributes without the help of adrenaline, making you basically into a super soldier, Walter said, now standing next to Leon, looking deep at him with the eyes. That will be the first dose, and the ordinary human this is deadly, but for you maybe not much will happen, Walter said. Leon darkened his expression, almost intimidating. Maybe? Walter sighed. William wants me to apply it to you every 10 days. We don't know what effects it might have on your body, he explained. Look, between you and me, I lowered the dosage of G used to this create without William knowing. This virus is not something that can't be treated lightly, even in almost insignificant amount. I use this amount and I think your body will be able to handle. But he stopped talking, and the agent sighed, leaning his head back on his chair. Okay, do it, he said. And Walter, despite the go-ahead, didn't for a few moments, still wondering if this was really a good idea. Well, so be it. Without further thought, Walter injected the stimulant into the agent's vein. He removed the syringe from the agent's arm and leaned back on his chair, waiting for something. The effects of the subject were almost immediate and noticeable, and now he didn't even know if it was a good or bad thing if the same thing happened to the agent. Seconds went by and the agent still kept his eyes closed, and the doctor was already getting a little nervous. Minutes passed and the agent could no longer sit up still. Sleep was knocking at the door. He had moved his eyes and looked outside the place where Walter had injected the stimulant. He felt nothing but a certain warmth coursing through his body, as if something was alive and coursing through his veins, until he finally reached his heart, and feeling stopped. Walter looked at him almost with a certain expression to be confirmed, and the agent just looked at him expressively. Well, what do you feel? The doctor asked. Nothing, the agent replied, to the doctor's confusion. At first I felt as if something warm ran through my veins, coursed through my body. But then I felt nothing more, the agent said, and Walter blinked in some confusion. Nothing? Well, he shouldn't say he didn't think of that possibility. He just didn't think the chances of it being small would actually happen. Well, maybe we should wait a little, because maybe your body is just stronger and it won't act that fast, Walters said, watching the agent stand up. Just before he walked at the quick pace towards his desk, picked up his notebook, and wrote something on the blank paper. If you say so, doctor. I just hope I don't wake up with an extra arm or claws in place of fingernails, the agent said, a bit of irony and fond of truth. I wouldn't make such of an ugly mistake. I don't think you need to worry about that happening, Walter said. But just in case, I will activate the cameras in your room. I will ask some of my assistants to monitor you. Please put on this bracelet, Walter ordered. After sighing slightly, the agent walks over towards the next closet and picks up a bracelet with a small glass ball in it. As soon as he put it on, the glass ball lit up green, indicating that he was free of mutations. Should he be suffering with anything? Change of anything of his being, the ball would grow orange or red if the tissue alerted to both medical wards and William's office. If you don't mind, Doc, I'm going to go to my room. I'll see you later, the agent said, not wanting to wait for a response, heading for the next room at the door. No problem. Good rest to you, Walter spoke. Being alone in this town has his thoughts and furies as the door closed. The day arrived and the agent woke up naturally at the same time as usual. His body was also used to waking up at 5:30, 30 minutes before the time he was scheduled to wake up. Normally he went to training camp after eating and watched the sea until it was time. It was a little moment to himself. William knew this. He hadn't seen him more than once, and although he thought the blonde could use some of that time to train even more, he decided to let him have that moment of peace. It was good to have his mind rested for the full and cruel day. He got out of his bed and he went to his bathroom. His eyes soon fell on his arm. He didn't feel anything different, and soon he just assumed that the stimulant didn't have any intended effect. Still, he kept one foot back. Walter was just a good doctor, but also a good scientist. He didn't usually get everything wrong. If William wanted results, Walter would give it to him. Well, there was nothing he could really do about it, so he left his room and he finished getting ready and walked back to the cafeteria. The agent stared up at the scene below him. Hunk had gotten some information about a suspected terrorist group that he had his eyes on for some time. Apparently, this group had brought a remote beachfront of that region. Perfect place to conduct their tests with whatever virus or biological weapon they have on them. Their job was quite simple. Go in, eliminate any hostile forces inside, rescue any civilians that were still alive, and then get the information they had. If there was any kind of virus around, destroy anything and everything related or infected. His blue eyes looked over at the terrain. It was the right time, but he could already see the sight lights. In the distance, they were already arriving. The helicopter began to slow down and descend, bringing the agent out of his thoughts, taking deep breaths and checking the equipment. He was wearing a set of black tactical clothing, a ballistic vest with small compartments for ammunition and grenades, a rear pouch with any unnecessary utensils with external pockets with turbo mixtures just in case. His rifle was an M4A1, a long clipped with a red dot and a silencer. And on his right was a Sig Saucer P222 pistol and a Desert Eagle on his left thigh. And just like Hunk, he had a black mask on his head. The helicopter landed and Hunk signaled him to activate his earpiece as the two exited the vehicle. Okay, officer, this is going to be totally different from training. Don't do anything unless I tell you to. Be careful and stay alert. I wouldn't have brought you in if I didn't know you were capable of. But one mistake and you can fuck this mission up. Watch what I do and try to learn from it. Got it? Hunk instructed, and the agent gave a brief nod. Yes, sir, he replied. With a simple nod, both agents began to move through the darkness of the forest as the helicopter took off. Soon the earpiece of the two squeaked. Reaper and Agent, come in. A male voice itself made it present on the other end of the line. Hunk's assistant. Reaper here. We're approaching the scene, Hunk said, moving deftly around the forest. Even with that mask, he seemed he could see everything in front of him clear as day. The agent, however, was not far from behind. Good, we still have satellite images. The enemy has set up surveillance over the walls of the inn. They have soldiers almost everywhere. We are suspect that they're using underground part of the inn for a temporary laboratory. This is where they took, and they are still taking in the kidnapped people, the man said, and the agent slowed down when Hunk signaled. The two began to approach slowly, observing the situation ahead. From his waistband, Hunk pulled out a pair of binoculars, while the agent behind him kept watch. The agent, even without binoculars, could see an enemy over the walls, over on certain floors of the inn, and onto the interface. In front of the gate, two soldiers were guarding the place. It was already known to the local population that the road of the inn was under maintenance, a lie orcharded by those terrorists, so it was quite unlikely that anyone would wander there, especially at that time of the night. Any updates? Hunk asked. Some. We are able to discover that what appears to be the beginnings of the organization in which the group has made contact. It's an organization that started out hidden somewhere in Africa and moved throughout Europe. We only got one name, and it is used only once. Vetro, the assistant said, and Hunk lowered his binoculars. Vetro? You were able to find out what they're planning? No, like I said, new group, or very well hidden. Just something about infect as fast as possible. Suggest anything? The assistant asked. Negative, Hunk replied, raising his binoculars again. I see an entrance to the underground floor, but it has a lot of guards. To the left there should be another entrance, or rather emergency exit. To your misfortune, there are cameras there, and it's also being watched by guards, the assistant said, and Hunk took the look to the left. The agent tilted his torso slightly to the side, looking at the same direction. Even though he was far away, he could still see two guards carrying what appeared to be a body in his arms. I see the place of two of them were going to door in the left corner of the wall, probably dumping the body outside, Hunk said. Two other guards guard the door from the inside, and a sniper has a wide view of both inside and outside. Well, do what you do best, the assistant said. Oh, and just one thing. William wants you to eliminate all enemies. He doesn't want any of them to stay alive, the assistant said. And the two agents were silent for a few moments. And tell Agent I wish him luck on his first mission out. Jake, out. Hunk said, and lowered his binoculars bedded back in his belt, nodding briefly to the agent. You heard him. Are you ready for this, Agent? Hunk asked, looking out of the way to make sure that Agent was ready to use everything he had learned up to that point. Without hesitation, and so the agent nodded. Good, this is our entrance, Hunk said, as the two began to move through the forest. After they got close enough, the two stopped and analyzed the situation. The sniper was standing on the makeshift guard tower, looking towards the 4 gates now outside. 2 of them went around the wall to dump that body, while the other 2 stood in front of the door. Get ready to act, Hunk said, just before raising his rifle towards the sniper. A single shot was required, and the sniper fell, and Hunk turned to the agent. I'll take care of the 2 at the front door. You take care of the others. The agent nodded and began to move again, fast and silent. His mind was focused and his eyes did not leave the 2 guards, who had just thrown his body into a pile of bodies behind the wall. Glancing over, he could see Hunk quietly eliminate the 2 guards. This was just his cue. With a quick but still silent steps, he stepped out of his cover and approached the guards. It was all very fast, and didn't even notice how fast he was. His eyes only focused on his 2 targets. He preferred not to expand any ammunition, but he knew how quickly bullets can run out in emergency situations, so he decided to use his combat knife. Its blade was long, sharp, and serrated near the base, and a grayish handle with the small silver details. The first guard turned so that he would return to his post, but the agent quickly stabbed him in the back. The guard's eyes widened and the agent pushed his body to the side, not even allowing him for the blood stained his glove, and he was already in front of the last guard, who didn't even have time to raise his rifle, even though he had seen the agent. The agent looked at the dead body of the terrorist with cold eyes. 2 frozen sapphires watched the blood dripping from his knife. His heart beat calmly, and he felt nothing but a certain numbness, which soon passed. It was then that his blue eyes focused on the pile of bodies, and he found himself standing still for a few moments. His blood ran cold, and he ignored Hunk's approaching footsteps. In the pile of bodies, the people of all ages, young, adult, old men, women, children, all of them with blood on their bodies, disfigured flesh and broken, long bones. The gray skin made it clear that they were being used as subjects for something. They would probably burn those bodies in the morning. Agent, Hunk called out to him. He turned to the captain. What you did was risky, but I guess you preferred it up and close and personal, huh? Hunk said, stepping closer and looking at the pile of bodies. Do you remember all the times you hesitated to do something, Agent? The agent known as the Reaper asked, and the rookie agent looked at him. His blue eyes seemed to have glow in the dark. There's why these people don't deserve your mercy. Let's go, Hunk said, after looking at the pile of bodies for a few moments. The agent followed him. The Reaper stopped in front of the door, looked around, and grabbed a small device from inside his pouch. Your radio is off, right? He asked the agent, who just nodded in confirmation. Then Hunk pressed one of the buttons, and that little device was designed to temporarily disable any electronic device within a radius of almost 500 meters, developed by Williams' hand-picked technical mechanism team. They went through the corridor of the door, and finally made inside the inn grounds. There were several boxes scattered around the courtyard, and they could see several guards either at their posts or walking to perform tasks. They moved their arms through the shadows, moving in a few dozen yards until they were forced to hide again, and the guard approached, trying to communicate over a radio. The man said it in Russian, complained loudly, after hearing nothing from the device in his hand, and the 2 ancients just looked at each other. The rookie also had knowledge of other languages. His Spanish was polished, and so was his Mandarin Chinese. However, though he was learning Russian, he was still far from being fluent, and could only understand a few words. However, Hunk was fluent in several languages. Russian happened to be one of them, and from what Agent 06 could tell, his captain did not seem to be happy from what he heard. As soon as the guard approached, Hunk took action. He came out of his hiding place and grabbed the guard by the neck, pulling him to the ground and choking him until he stopped moving. The Reaper then let go of the guard and stabbed a knife to his neck. Before they could do anything, more guards appeared ahead, and they stood talking in front of the emergency exit that had its doors open. Around them, the other guards remained in their positions, just doing their duty or taking advantage of the break caused by the malfunctioning electronics to smoke a cigarette. The two of them analyzed the situation. Most of the guards who were not inside the inn had left, which made the entrances inaccessible, but it opened the possibility of entering through any types of windows, as long as they were not seen. On the upper floors of the terrace, the snipers with some view of the emergency exits, and the others could not see. Their current situation was not being able to advance very far from being seen, where some of the guards out front where they were just up in the emergency exit. They could even kill those guards, but the two others were dozens of meters from to the left and would certainly notice that.